Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're not just looking at a market trend. We are, and I mean this literally, launching a forensic audit of reality itself.
That's right. The sources our listener has provided are truly extraordinary. It's an intellectual earthquake challenging the most foundational number in modern
Right,
science.
right. Everyone knows the number 13.8 billion years. It's the reigning champion of cosmic age. But our sources today argue that this figure isn't a measured fact at all. They call it, provocatively, a mathematical mirage.
And they're not just critiquing it, they're proposing a powerful rival chronological coordinate. Not one based on, the silent arbitrary decay of isotopes, but one secured by something completely different.
A continuous, verifiable, and living legal system, the coordinate, 5,786 years.
The sources are just a breathtaking synthesis. We're talking high-level cosmology, geology, particle physics, all woven together with ancient Jewish metaphysics and legal history. The core argument is that the universe was initialized.
Initialized, so a top-down creation.
Exactly, in a state of absolute functional maturity. This is key. It means everything looks old because it was designed to be operational from the very first second.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty robust. First, we have to explore the absolute limits of scientific inference. Can math and physics really reconstruct the past with certainty?
Second, we have to get our heads around this core concept of a functionally mature creation. What's that mean, and what problems does it solve?
And finally, we have to audit what the sources call the cryptographic certainty of Misora, this ancient, unbroken chain of transmission that anchors that younger timeline.
And this is where the stakes get incredibly high.
Yeah.
This isn't just an academic debate. The sources frame this as a choice, not between science and faith, but between two competing boundary conditions for existence itself.
A binary choice.
It is. You have to choose what they call a stochastic miracle. The idea that this hyper-ordered, complex universe just randomly emerged from lawless chaos.
Right.
Or an architectural miracle. A single, intelligent initialization event that set all the parameters from the start. One requires a belief in uncaused chance, the other, an architect.
Okay, let's start right there with that opening premise. It's a huge philosophical and mathematical challenge to the entire Deep Time project. This idea that reconstructing the past is mathematically often impossible. Why? It hinges on something called the ill-posed inverse problem.
Right, this is a really foundational concept in mathematics and information theory.
Yeah?
People like Rolf Landauer were exploring it back in the 60s. The core idea is actually pretty simple to grasp. As any system evolves, as it moves forward in time, information is always lost to entropy.
Things get messy, disorder increases.
Exactly. So when you stand in the present and you look at the current state of a system and you try to work backward to figure out its exact history, that's what's called an inverse problem. And very often it's ill-posed.
And ill-posed sound like a very polite mathematical term for you can't do it.
It basically means the solution isn't unique or it's incredibly unstable. Landauer's idea was that the present state of any complex system is a degenerate value.
A degenerate value, what does that mean in practical terms?
Think of it like this. Imagine you're an archaeologist and you find the ruins of a great city. That's the present state. The city is gone. But how did it fall?
Could be anything. A war, a plague, a famine, an economic collapse.
A secret assassination that triggered a civil war. Infinite possible histories, infinite antecedent trajectories, all leading to the exact same pile of rubble you see today. You see the single outcome, but you can't definitively trace the single true path that led to it.
So the sources call this property echofinality.
Yes, and this is the critical blow. If contradictory, radically different historical models like the slow, gradual 13.8 billion year model and the rapid, mature 5,786 year initialization model can both logically and mathematically produce the identical observable present,
The starlight we see, the rock layers, the DNA.
then science, which relies purely on empirical inference from the present, is crippled. It cannot, by itself, tell you which history is a true one.
Which means the scientific timeline isn't built on necessity. It's built on a choice,
Yeah.
an assumption.
That is the entire argument of this section. The standard uniformitarian approach, the assumption that all processes, radioactive decay, erosion, all of it, have always happened at the same slow, constant rate. That's not a logical compulsion from the data.
It's a philosophical preference.
It's a preference for gradualism.
Yeah.
The sources argue very forcefully that the initialization model, a rapid top-down creation event that sets maximal functional information from the start, is an equally valid mathematical solution for the state of the universe right now. The choice between them isn't scientific, it's axiomatic. You choose your starting premise.
And this limitation, this fog of the past, it only gets deeper when we look at the very foundation of the secular timeline, which ironically is based on the idea that at time zero, all the laws of physics failed. I'm talking about the singularity.
The standard cosmological model, the one born from Hawking and Penrose's work, it absolutely rests on the singularity. It's a mathematical boundary at the beginning of time where everything we know about physics just stops.
Density, temperature, curvature, they all become infinite.
Right, and the sources hammer this point home. That is not an explanation. It is a breakdown of explanation. It creates an undeniable causal gap at the absolute foundation of the materialist worldview.
A gap that, if you admit it's there, kind of invalidates your whole model. So how do proponents of the standard model handle this massive lawless hole at the beginning of everything?
They defer to the future. They engage in what the theologian and physicist John Polkinghorne brilliantly called promissory materialism.
Promissory materialism, I like that.
Perfect, isn't it? They argue that some future non-existent theory, probably a theory of quantum gravity, will eventually resolve the singularity and explain where the universe came from. They're asking us to accept a worldview built on a placeholder for a theory that hasn't even been written yet.
They're writing a check that future physics has to cash.
And that leads us directly back to the two miracles we mentioned at the start. If the beginning is truly lawless, a point of pure chaos, then the emergence of our incredibly fine-tuned, orderly universe becomes, well, an act of chance that defies all probability.
So we are forced into this choice.
An unavoidable choice between two equally miraculous propositions. On the one hand, the standard model asks you to accept stochastic miracle.
Miracle of chance.
The belief that this immensely ordered, finely tuned universe, with gravity just strong enough and the electromagnetic force just right, emerged spontaneously from lawless chaos or absolute nothingness.
This is where that tornado analogy comes in, which is just so powerful.
The sources frame it perfectly. Believing that the cosmos emerged randomly from a singularity is statistically equivalent to believing a tornado can sweep through a junkyard and accidentally assemble a perfect Boeing 747.
Fully fueled, all the wiring connected, ready for takeoff.
And not just one 747, a whole fleet of them, all working in perfect synchrony. The materialist, in accepting this, has replaced the idea of a sovereign king with what the sources call the idol of chance.
But it's even worse than that, isn't it? If the laws of physics don't exist at time zero, then chance doesn't even mean anything. You're not just betting on a long shot. You're asking for creation out of nothing, governed by nothing.
That's the core absurdity. You're attributing the creative power to a brainless dice roll. In contrast, the initialization model accepts an architectural miracle that an intelligent source defined the system's maturity and its physical constants from the first moment. The logic is, if science permits uncaused initial constants, which it does in the stochastic model, then it must also permit uncaused initial functional maturity.
This is usually where the classic objection comes in, Occam's razor. The argument that a creator must be infinitely more complex than the universe, making an eternal universe a simpler explanation.
And the sources call this a fundamental category error. It's a really important point to slow down on. That critique mistakenly treats the creator as just a bigger, more complicated mechanism within the same system.
As if the creator is just another object that needs explaining, which leads to infinite regress.
Right. Who created the creator? But the sources distinguish between two totally different modes of existence. Contingent versus necessary.
Okay, define those for us.
The physical universe is contingent. It exists, but it could have not existed. It relies on some cause or reason for its existence. The creator, on the other hand, is defined as necessary existence, an entity whose very essence is existence. It cannot not exist. It's independent of time, cause, or composition.
And this necessary existence in the metaphysics laid out here isn't complex at all.
It's the absolute opposite. In Jewish metaphysics, the ultimate reality called Awtsmoos is defined as infinitely simple. The Hebrew is pashat pataklis hapashetis. It means it has no parts, no differentiation, no internal components. It is a perfect non-composite unity.
So if you redefine parsimony or simplicity, the simple non-contingent creator actually becomes the ultimate explanatory stop rule.
Exactly. When you weigh that single non-composite creator against the alternative, A 13.8 billion year brute fact universe loaded with dozens of unexplained, uncaused complexities.
The fine-tuning constants, the strength of the four forces.
All of it. All these arbitrary numbers we just have to accept as brute facts.
Yeah.
In that context, the simple creator grounding all of contingent reality in a single source is arguably far more parsimonious. You're swapping countless accidental facts for one necessary one.
Okay, we've covered the philosophical and mathematical limits. Now let's get into the physical evidence itself. The sources have some incredibly strong language here, calling the 13.8 billion year figure a mass delusion and a hallucination of duration.
This is a crucial concept they call coordinate relativity. The claim is that 13.8 billion years is not an objective measurement of time passing. It is, and this is the key, the mathematical recording of the informational void that is created when you assume the universe is a machine that built itself, piece by stochastic piece.
So the number is just a reflection of the starting assumption. The calculation only validates the premise you fed into it.
Precisely. They use a fantastic analogy. Imagine you want to calculate the age of a healthy 20-year-old man. If your starting assumption is that he must have evolved, atom by atom, from primordial dust at a constant gradual rate.
You'd calculate his age to be trillions and trillions of years.
Right. And that timeline would be mathematically consistent with your assumption that he built himself from the bottom up. But it's a hallucination of duration because you failed to account for his actual primary state, birth. Or in the cosmic sense, initialization.
So the 13.8 billion years is the measure of the extrapolator's blindness to the possibility of a top-down design.
That's the idea. The number isn't measuring time. It's measuring the informational gap created by the uniformitarian assumption. It's the difference between calculating how long it takes to build a skyscraper brick by brick versus just measuring the time since the completed building was open for business.
And this mathematical projection, this skyscraper, is starting to show some serious structural cracks under the weight of new data. The most famous one right now is the Hubble crisis.
The Hubble tension is probably the single biggest crisis in cosmology today. It has reached a 5 sigma level of statistical certainty.
And 5 sigma, for our listeners, is the gold standard in physics, right? That's when you can claim a discovery.
It is. It means there's only a 1 in 3.5 million chance the result is a fluke. And the tension is this. There's a massive discrepancy between how fast we measure the universe expanding today, using local measurements, and how fast our models predict it should be expanding, based on data from the early universe.
So the universe is expanding faster than the standard model says it should be. And that's a huge problem that should, in theory, falsify the model. So what's protecting it?
The dark sector.
Yeah.
The 95% of the universe that our models say is composed of unobserved dark matter and dark energy. The sources call the standard model a metaphysical Ponzi scheme.
Strong words.
Because to make the math match what we observe, the model requires this 95% fudge factor of stuff we can't see or detect. Dark energy has to be invoked to explain the accelerated expansion, and dark matter has to be invoked to explain why galaxies don't fly apart.
So the moment the data doesn't fit the prediction, they just invent a new, unobservable substance to make the math work again.
That's the critique. This auxiliary belt of dark stuff functions exactly as the philosopher of science Imre Lakatos described. It's a protective shield that prevents the core theory, the 13.8 billion year gradualist narrative, from ever being falsified. If you can just invent invisible matter and energy whenever you need it, you've basically surrendered your claim to being a falsifiable scientific theory.
And adding even more stress to this is the James Webb Space Telescope. It's delivering physical data that seems to directly violate the timeline, creating what the sources are calling a maturity crisis.
The JWST has been a genuine game changer, a real destabilizer for deep-time cosmology. Its deep surveys are finding these galaxies they're calling red monsters.
Red monsters.
Massive, fully formed stellar structures, some with the mass of our own Milky Way, existing within the first few 100 million years of the supposed timeline.
Which, if the universe is 13.8 billion years old, simply shouldn't be possible. They wouldn't have had enough time to gradually assemble.
Absolutely not. The level of formation of efficiency galaxies that are huge, heavy, and complex almost instantly after the Big Bang, it just shatters all the theoretical gradualist limits. These impossible structures are a huge piece of evidence suggesting that functional maturity was an initialized boundary condition. The system was deployed mature, not built slowly from dust.
Let's bring this down to Earth and look at the chronometers here, starting with radiometric dating. The sources allege a circularity of calibration that creates a false sense of agreement between different dating methods.
Right, the illusion of consilience. It comes from clocks that everyone thinks are independent, but are actually secretly interdependent. Take carbon-14 dating. It's presented as this independent witness to age.
It's not.
To convert its raw decay ratio into an actual calendar year, it has to be calibrated against another record, the established tree ring chronology called InCal 20. So if the tree ring record has errors, and it's susceptible to all sorts of environmental factors, those errors are inherited directly by the carbon-14 scale. They're not two independent witnesses. They're one witness talking to itself.
And in geology, this circularity sounds even more blatant. It sounds like it borders on active data filtering.
It does. The sources cite what they call discordance filtering. In conventional geology, rock layers are not primarily dated by radiometric tests. They're dated by the index fossils they contain, which are slotted into a pre-established evolutionary sequence.
So if a rock layer is supposed to be, say, 3 million years old because of the pig fossil inside it, but the radiometric test comes back and says it's 200 million years old.
Then the radiometric result is very often discarded. It's labeled as contaminated or reset by a heating event. The philosophical expectation, the deep time, gradualist timeline, is used to select which data points are considered valid.
The sources give a specific example of this, the KBS Tuff controversy.
A classic case. These were volcanic ash layers, and the initial radiometric dates that came back were all over the place, from 2.6 million years to over 200 million. A total mess. So what happened? The dates were manually reset to a specific age, 1.8 million years, for one reason.
To match the evolutionary timeline required by the pig fossils found in the adjacent layer.
Exactly. They adjusted the physical measurement to make sure it didn't break the biological theory. This suggests a systematic practice where only data that save the phenomena of deep time is kept. It turns radiometric dating from a discovery mechanism into a confirmation mechanism.
What about the tree ring record itself? Dendrochronology is often held up as this pristine, undeniable proof of thousands of years of history. The sources call it a forensic sleight of hand.
Because the part of the record that is actually verifiable, meaning an organically connected continuous sequence of rings from living to dead trees, is a microscopic sliver of data. It completely vanishes at the edge of the Holocene around 10 to 12,000 years ago. It provides zero organic verification for the billions of years it supposedly supports.
So it's another closed loop.
A closed loop of circular calibration. Once you step beyond the horizon of verifiable surviving organic matter, the radiometric clock is no longer a measured fact. It's an unconstrained projection, validated only by the philosophical preference for deep time.
But the most compelling and maybe the most empirically undeniable physical challenge to the whole deep time model might be the zircon-helium retention paradox. This isn't theoretical. It's a measurable physical fact that seems to create an absolute double bind.
This is a critical point, and it really demands full attention. Zircon crystals are like tiny geological time capsules. They contain trace amounts of uranium. Over time, that uranium decays into lead.
Okay, so the uranium-lead ratio is the first clock. And that clock suggests vast amounts of time have passed, billions of years worth of nuclear decay.
Correct. That's the deep time part of the equation. But in that decay process, the uranium also releases alpha particles, which immediately grab electrons and become helium gas.
Right. And here's the paradox.
Here's the paradox. Helium is an incredibly tiny, non-reactive noble gas. It leaks out of the crystal structure very, very quickly, especially when it's heated, which is inevitable deep in the Earth's crust. If those zircon crystals were really 1.5 billion years old, every last atom of that helium should have degassed and vanished eons ago.
But when they actually measured it,
the REAT project documented massive amounts of helium still trapped inside these deep core zircons. And the quantitative amount of that retained helium is consistent with a diffusion rate that suggests the crystals have only existed for about 6,000 years. Plus or minus a couple thousand.
Okay, let me just make sure I'm following this because it's huge.
Yeah.
The chemistry of the crystal, the uranium to lead ratio, says billions of years of nuclear decay happened. But the physics of the crystal, its ability to hold on to helium gas, says it can't be more than a few thousand years old.
You've summarized the absolute double bind perfectly. There's only one way to resolve that contradiction without throwing out the data. You have to conclude that the axiom of uniformitarianism, the idea that rates are always constant, is false,
The nuclear clock must have run incredibly fast.
producing billions of years worth of lead in a very short time, while the diffusion clock, the physical leaking of gas, ran slow, preserving the helium. This forces the conclusion that nuclear decay rates were massively accelerated at some point in the past. The sources call it cool acceleration, and it's direct empirical proof of non-uniform processes.
Okay, so if we accept the mathematical problems and the physical evidence of acceleration, we're kind of in a state of chronological agnosticism. To get to the specific number, 500, years, we have to tackle the biggest objection. If the universe isn't 13.8 billion years old, why does everything look so old? Isn't that a deception?
This is where the concept of functional maturity becomes the absolute central pillar of the entire argument. The sources are very clear. The apparent age is not a deception. It is an inevitable consequence of mature initialization,
Meaning?
meaning that for a universe to be immediately functional, stable, and habitable right from the moment of creation, which the 586-year timeline requires, it must possess the structural characteristics of prior development. It's a structural necessity.
The atom analogy makes this instantly clear.
It's the perfect analogy. Adam was created as a fully mature adult. If a modern scientist had measured his bone density, his muscle mass, or his cellular repair mechanisms just hours after his creation, what would they have concluded?
That he'd been alive for decades.
Exactly. Their calculation would be mathematically consistent with the appearance of age, but it would be a false timeline. The Creator gave him functional maturity for the sake of immediate habitation and function.
And the most visually striking example of this apparent age is distant starlight. How does the initialization model handle seeing stars that are supposedly billions of light years away?
Distant starlight is defined as a functional coordinate and a primary boundary condition. It's not necessarily a record of billions of years of travel time. It's more like a holographic initialization.
A holographic initialization. So the light was created in transit.
That's the idea. The universe was deployed with full internal coherence. If you think of reality as this immense, complex tapestry, a weaving of light and matter, that tapestry has to be visible from every point at the moment of deployment. The light waves were initialized in situ to allow for immediate observation and function.
Okay, let's pivot to the biological records, specifically the problem of the dinosaurs. The sources apply information theory to the ancient texts here, and they define dinosaurs as spaghetti code.
This is a brilliant integration of metaphysics and modern biology. The oral tradition, specifically Rashi's commentary on Genesis, records that the flood was triggered by a catastrophic biological failure, a systemic corruption.
Not just human moral corruption.
Biological corruption. It says the animals, cattle, beasts, fowl stopped mating within their own species. They were breaching the fundamental firewalls that the architect had placed between biological kinds. The sources label this event active bioterrorism, the systematic violation of the initialized protocol for genetic integrity.
And the result of this chaotic genetic mixing was the dinosaur.
They're viewed as grotesque hybridizations, literally spaghetti code. If a biological kind is like an optimized protected piece of software and you start forcibly merging incompatible operating systems, what you get is chaotic, unstable, buggy output.
And that maps onto their strange morphology.
It maps perfectly. The superfluous spikes, the illogical gigantism, the hyper-aggressive weaponry that seems almost like a biological error. They are functional, yes, but they are living errors, the unrecoverable malware of the antediluvian world.
Which answers the two big questions. One, why did God create these terrifying things? And two, why didn't Noah save them on the ark?
The answer is the architect didn't create the spaghetti code. The corruption was a result of the willful breach of the biological laws. And as for Noah, the ark wasn't a zoo. It was a biodigital clean room. Its sole purpose was to preserve the original source code, the pure, uncorrupted, necessary kinds for the new post-flood world. The dinosaurs and hybrids were corrupted data, left behind for deletion during the systemic format of the flood.
Moving on from the fossil record, there's another huge hurdle for the young timeline: the time required for evolution. The sheer impossibility of getting complex mutations to arise is known as the waiting time problem.
And this is probably the most rigorous, mathematically airtight challenge from population genetics against the entire gradualist timeline. Evolution assumes complexity just accumulates bit by bit through tiny beneficial mutations. But the reality is that most functional biological features,
Like an eye or a wing,
or even something like the blood clotting cascade, they require multiple specific coordinated mutations to appear simultaneously before they provide any survival advantage at all. And natural selection is blind to to those half-finished steps.
It can't select for something that isn't fully useful yet, so you have to wait for random chance to get it right all at once.
Exactly. This creates a prohibitive informational bottleneck. The complexity has to wait for random genetic drift to hit the jackpot, and the numbers on this are just staggering.
How staggering. What are the numbers for humans?
High-fidelity numerical simulations, factoring in population size, mutation rates, all of it, have established that for a human-like population, the waiting time to fix a coordinated string of just two specific beneficial nucleotides, two letters in the genetic code, is approximately 216 million years.
Wait, say that again, 216 million years? Just to
Yeah.
get two specific letters to stick in the genome?
That's the magnitude of the mathematical constraint. Now, what's the timescale the standard evolutionary model gives us for the entire transition from a primate ancestor to a modern human?
About 6 million years.
Right. And that transition involves vastly more complexity than just two letters. It's an impossible time frame.
And recent genetic discoveries have only made it worse.
They've amplified the problem exponentially. The new telomere-telomere sequencing has shattered that old myth that humans and chimps are 99% identical. When you include all the non-aligned regions, the true genetic difference is closer to 15%. That's over 400 million specific genetic differences that would need to be authored by random mutation.
So the math is just relentless. A process that needs 216 million years to fix two letters supposedly authored 400 million letters in only 6 million years.
It's an absolute mathematical absurdity. The timeline isn't just a little short. It's impossible by orders of magnitude. It strongly suggests the information had to be inserted top-down, not accumulated from the bottom up.
Okay, let's address the final major physical objection every critic raises. The thermal crisis, the heat problem. If billions of years of nuclear decay happened in a single year, the Earth would have melted.
That is the classic and most powerful straw man objection. The calculation is correct. Compressing that much energy, about 2 times 10 to the 28 joules, into a year would vaporize the crust. But the solution lies in understanding how that heat load was partitioned and crucially consumed as work.
The sources propose a two-part solution, starting with the difference between inherited information and actual historical process.
Exactly. First, partitioning. The deepest basement rocks, the granites, the Earth's core, were created with their isotopic ratios already in place. The uranium and lead in those ancient zircons is information, not history.
Just like Adam's bones were created with the density of a 30-year-old.
Precisely. Since that decay never actually happened historically in those deep rocks, it would produce zero heat. That step alone instantly removes 99% of the calculated thermal load. The heat problem only applies to the fossil-bearing flood layers on the surface.
So we're only dealing with the heat from that remaining 1%. Where did that energy go?
The Earth itself acted as a charging battery. It converted that thermal load into mechanical and chemical work. Dr. John Baumgartner's models of catastrophic plate tectonics show that accelerating the continental plates and building the mountain ranges would consume roughly 10 to the 25 joules in tectonic fracture work.
So the heat became the fuel for rearranging the planet's surface.
It was the engine. And there's a second energy sponge. The process of converting all that wet, saturated mud from the flood into hard metamorphic rock involves massive endothermic reactions. It's a chemical sponge effect that, according to Dr. Andrew Snelling's work, would have absorbed another 10 to the 25 joules of latent heat.
The heat was consumed in the very process of forming the rock layers we see today.
Exactly. The system found a way to use the energy to fuel its own transformation. The sources even touch on more theoretical mechanisms, like neutrino shunting, where accelerated decay might radiate a larger fraction of its energy away as neutrinos, which pass right through matter without heating it. The bottom line is, the heat problem is entirely solvable within known physics, as long as you drop the uniformitarian assumption.
We've now established a kind of chronological agnosticism. To get from there to the specific certain coordinate of 5,786 years, we need a different type of data. Something science can't generate. Witnessed testimony, verified by law.
This is the definitive transition. We're leaving the lab and entering the courtroom. That 586-year figure, it's not folklore, it's not a vague calculation, it is codified as a forensic legal constant in texts like Seder Olam Rabbah and authenticated by Maimonides himself in the Mishneh Torah.
And crucially, this isn't just something in a dusty old book, it's a living system, functionally checked every single day.
Every day. That coordinate is verified in the writing of Jewish divorce bills and commercial contracts all over the world. In Jewish law, an incorrect date on a get A divorce bill renders it legally void. This means the chronology is secured by the continuous operational legal custody of a living nation. A high-precision signal that has remained stable for millennia, while the secular model is, right now, shattering under the Hubble tension.
The ultimate anchor for this entire timeline is the Sinai revelation. The sources treat this not just as a theological event, but as a verifiable historical event of mass empirical testimony. They call it a distributed ledger.
Sinai is the ultimate witnessed horizon. The entire foundation rests on the fact that this isn't about one prophet's subjective vision in a cave. It's about the simultaneous empirical experience of millions of witnesses, men, women, children, all receiving the same data stream at the exact same instant.
And the sources describe this moment with an almost cinematic intensity, a tearing of reality's fabric.
They describe a moment of total system trauma. Imagine the entire universe, billions of people, all the layers of existence, the sephiros above, going into absolute frozen silence, the atmosphere in a deep vacuum, no bird chirps, no ocean moves, the boundaries of reality dissolve. And into that void, the voice of the Creator blasts out, witnessed by millions. It was a system override that permanently rewired the genetic and historical memory of an entire people.
In modern terms, that sounds like a distributed ledger of verification. The blockchain analogy seems almost perfectly designed to explain the immutability of that memory.
It's the perfect analogy. The chain of custody, the Mizora, maintained by millions of independent nodes, families over millennia, each one passing the account from parent to child. This system has inherent Byzantine fault tolerance.
Meaning you can't corrupt the ledger.
To corrupt it, you'd have to successfully compromise millions of nodes simultaneously and continuously for over 3,300 years. The sheer statistical impossibility of that act secures the integrity of the data stream.
So, to deny the 5-Coven 726-year record, you have to believe in a conspiracy of impossible proportions.
You're forced to believe in retroactive mythogenesis, the theory that some later group of priests managed to gaslight an entire nation into accepting a traumatic, false memory of slavery, of wandering in a desert, of this terrifying public revelation, and did it so perfectly that not a single dissenting record, not one counter history, survived. The sources argue this is a sociological and mathematical impossibility.
And this entire transmission chain, the Mizora, has been forensically audited and recorded.
Yes. Maimonides' introduction to his legal code details the exact specific 40-stage chain of transmission, from Moses at Sinai, through the prophets, to the men of the Great Assembly, all the way to Rav Ashi, the final redactor of the Talmud. This is the sovereign ledger, and the sources stress a critical point. The validity of the Torah rests on the witness of the nation, not the affidavit, the scroll. The nation carries the book as a factual transcript of what they collectively saw.
Okay, but the skeptic's immediate retort is that this is a closed loop, a self-referential religious document. How is this 40-stage ledger validated externally?
Through what the sources call hostile pings, verifications from geopolitical enemies who had zero incentive to propagate Jewish mythology or chronology. A signal verified by a hostile node is the strongest possible evidence.
So give us the examples, the strongest external pins for this ledger.
The existence of the Davidic dynasty is a huge one. For decades, secular minimalists insisted King David was a myth, a fictional character. That narrative was definitively falsified by two hostile pings: the Tel Dan stele from an Aramean king and the Mesha stele from a Moabite king. Both refer to the House of David as a recognized, powerful political dynasty just 150 years after he supposedly lived.
His enemies confirmed his existence. What about the Exodus itself?
Here, the sources cite what they call the Modeh B'Mixat trap, the partial admission. Even the most skeptical secular scholars, like Richard Elliott Friedman, are forced to admit that the names of the Levite leadership, Moshe, Phineas, Merari, are authentic, archaic Egyptian names.
That's a linguistic fingerprint. It proves the leadership caste was historically immersed in Egypt, exactly like the narrative claims.
Precisely. If the story was a late Judean fabrication, the authors would have given their heroes good, solid Hebrew names. The survival of these specific Egyptian names validates the historical payload. And then you have the Merneptah from 1208 BCE, an Egyptian pharaoh boasting of his destruction of Israel as a people group. Just 52 years after the settlement of Canaan began, it confirms a formidable nation was there exactly when the Mizora says they should be.
Finally, there's a powerful sociological argument against the idea that the Torah just gradually evolved. The sources call it the algorithm of pain.
This is a point of irreducible cost. The Torah is not a collection of feel-good fireside stories. It is a totalitarian algorithm of pain, economic restriction, and immediate physical demands.
Circumcision.
Circumcision and immediate painful mutilation. The Sabbath, ceasing 14% of your economic production every single week. And most profoundly, Shemitah, the sabbatical year, which commanded an agrarian nation to abandon its fields and risk total starvation every seventh year.
No population gradually accepts an economic death sentence or ritual agony based on a nice story someone wrote down centuries later.
Absolutely not. A population only accepts a statutory code that imposes that level of agony and risk if they witness the undeniable, irrefutable source of the command with their own eyes at Sinai. The sheer burden of the law, its very existence and maintenance over millennia, is the most powerful sociological proof that the revelation was a real historical event.
So to truly grasp the 586-year coordinate, we have to go beyond forensics and into the metaphysical architecture, the source code of reality. The physical universe in this framework isn't an accident, it's a terminal output layer.
Right. In the Kabbalistic cosmology and the sources, reality is layered. Hidden universes revealing themselves. The entire physical world we experience, the globes, the flowers, the people, the books, is categorized as Melchut, or kingship, which is the final expression of the world of Asia, or action. It's the final deployment layer of a vast fractal chain of descent called the Seder Hishtalshalut. The 586-year chronology is the specific timestamp of that final deployment.
So we're living in the final materialized instruction set. But for nature and physical laws to even exist, it required this paradoxical act, the Tzimtzum.
This is the moment where infinite potentiality had to be constrained to allow for finite definition. Initially, the infinite light, the Or Ein Sof, filled all reality. There was no place for a world. So to create a finite world, the infinite had to perform a tzimtzum, a contraction or concealment of that light. This created a conceptual void, a chalal, where limits could exist.
So the void isn't nothingness, it's the potential for limitation.
Exactly. And this is where Tiva, or nature, resides. Nature, the laws of physics, is the instruction set architecture, the kailim, or vessels, that constricts and channels the infinite light. These vessels are what allow the universe to appear stable and self-sustaining. They are the necessary constraints for a 786-year physical system to exist.
Which means the laws of physics aren't autonomous, eternal rules. They are the continuously sustained manifestation of the architect's will.
The sources stress this idea of immanence. The laws of nature are the continuously sustained speech act of the Creator, renewed every single instant. If that creative force, that divine utterance, were to cease for even a fraction of a second, the universe wouldn't just stop. It would be as if it had never existed at all.
And this brings us full circle, back to the fundamental error of the 13.8 billion year figure, which the sources call the calculation of darkness.
When a materialist observes the universe, they feel its solidity, its stability, its immense weight and autonomy. They feel it as yesh, as real substance. And the sources say this feeling is metaphysically valid. That feeling of depth is a genuine point of contact with the Creator's essence, the Awtsmoos, which is the only truly necessary existence.
The universe feels eternal because its root is the infinite.
Yes. But here is the fatal error. The observer takes that valid feeling of ontological depth and stability and applies a broken uniformitarian ruler to it, trying to measure it horizontally through time. The result, 13.8 billion years, is a total systemic failure, a hallucination of autonomy. The observer has tragically mistaken the ontological depth of the essence for chronological length.
We have completed a monumental audit. We've established that the 13.8 billion year figure is a theoretical bandage on a failing calculation, requiring a 95% unobserved fudge factor and contradicted by facts like the zircon-helium paradox and the impossible maturity of JWST's galaxies.
And on the other side, the 5,786-year record stands as an immutable coordinate. It's not secured by silent arbitrary decay rates, but by a distributed ledger of continuous legal and vocal testimony, the Mizora, a ledger cross-verified by hostile empires and anchored by the undeniable historical trauma of Sinai. The conflict, at the end of the day, is a choice between a calculated failure and a witnessed reality.
The source material suggests the universe isn't a machine that built itself, but a signed letter from the king, deployed at a specific time. So our final thought is this. If the age of the cosmos is secured not by silent variables, but by a continuous, legally verified signal transmitted from a definitive historical event, the revelation at Sinai, what does the reality of this witness horizon demand of you as an observer, knowing the identity and the intention of the architect is now forensically confirmed?